I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown, coming straight to you right after the SAG Awards to give you my thoughts on what this means for the 2025 Oscars. We are at the very end of the race in 2 days' time, this Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. I will be giving my final predictions in all 23 categories, but first want to wait for tonight because you had NPSE, you had ASC, and then of course the SAG Awards to kind of come out, see what happened, and see how things that kind of influenced the Oscar race. And what did we learn from the SAGs? That we really don't know what's going to happen, which I think will make the Oscar race even more exciting. But if you're new to the series, what I've been doing every single week, all the way back since October, was trying to predict what was going to get nominated, and then the past few weeks here, trying to predict what's going to actually win. We're on our 9th season of predicting the Oscars, so we have a great track record of accurate predictions, and you can go back and check out some of those. We're not perfect, but we are pretty good most of the time. But ultimately, I make these videos to help you with your own predictions, to do an analysis, to give you some of my thoughts and get some of the thinking out there, and then ultimately for you to make your own predictions for what you think are going to win at the Oscars. So this video is going to talk about really just the ensemble win, the actress win, and the actor win, where I'm standing right now, what this kind of means for the Oscars, and then we won't go into full depth on my kind of final predictions video on Wednesday in terms of every single category, 10 plus minutes like we're doing on this video. So this will give you a bit of an understanding, a more in-depth understanding on how I'm thinking about the acting races, at least as of right now, a couple of days here before my final kind of predictions video comes out. So I want to start off with the Best Ensemble category, with the winner going to Conclave. And we mentioned this in my BAFTA video, reaction video, where it won Best Film at BAFTA. Okay, not a huge surprise, but it was an important thing. But we really said, well, if it wins at SAG for Best Ensemble, then we have a race. Then it makes things a lot more competitive and a lot more interesting. And that's what happened here for Ensemble. So some years SAG don't really have any impact on the Oscar Best Picture race, but I actually think this year it does. It shows that the actors, even though they didn't give Ralph Fiennes or Isabella Rossellini, an acting award, they did show us enough support for this movie that they liked this movie. So when we think about the Best Picture category at the Oscars, because the actors are the largest branch of the Academy, what movies they like can have an effect on what wins for Best Picture. And we've seen this with past years like Spotlight winning at SAG or Parasite winning at SAG and then going on to win at the Oscars. Sometimes these kind of surprises start at the SAG Awards. So I think when we're talking about Best Picture, I think Anora is still a front runner, but Conclave is absolutely the number 2 spot over a movie like The Brutalist. And I mention that because I think Anora and Conclave are very similar in terms of how their Oscar chances could go. They're both movies with a similar amount of nominations. They're both movies with a likely screenplay win. I mention that because only 3 out of the last 10 winners for Best Picture didn't have a screenplay prize. That is to say, 7 out of the last 10 Best Picture winners did. So it always helps to see, okay, what are winning the kind of 2 screenplay prizes? Okay, will that affect what's going to happen for Best Picture? So I think the fact that both of them have likely best screenplay wins in their fates are as good signs of them winning eventually Best Picture. The difference between the 2 movies, however, is that Mikey Madison is still a contender in Best Actress, and I think Sean Baker right now is the frontrunner to win for Best Director, whereas someone like Edward Berger wasn't even nominated for Best Director. Now that hasn't stopped them in the past. Sean Hayter for Coda wasn't nominated for Best Director, and that movie ended up winning Best Picture. Same thing with Peter Farrelly in Green Book, so we've seen this happen before. But sometimes, when Martin McDonagh doesn't get nominated for 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, that's maybe a sign that that movie wasn't as well liked as maybe we thought. So I think right now the edge for Best Picture still goes to Anora, but it does complicate a lot of things because a couple of days ago, I think there was a real scenario where Anora maybe won 5 Oscars, and now its path has shrunk a little bit to maybe more like 2 or 3. I think ultimately the edge I give, a PGA DGA win over a BAFTA SAG win, just because PGA uses the preferential ballot, which theoretically Conclave should have done well on if it was the kind of number 2, number 3 that most people like. But it does seem like both movies, Anora and Conclave, well liked, no one really hates the movies. The question then becomes is how many people absolutely love the movie to put it in that kind of number one spot that would ultimately kind of push it over the edge. But it's an absolutely really tight race for Best Picture, that's for sure. Then for the Best Actress category, the winner tonight was Demi Moore for The Substance, which wasn't a massive surprise, but it was necessary for her to stay in the race. I think if Mikey Madison won here, most people would have ended up picking Mikey to win at the Oscars. And right now, though, I think because Demi won in this category, I'm a little bit conflicted as to who I'm going to predict for the Oscars. I think right now I do lean Demi Moore because I don't want to rock the boat too much. One important fact to keep in mind when you're making your own predictions is that on average, for the past 10 years, more than 3 out of the 4 winners at SAG also overlap at the Oscars. That is to say, it's pretty rare for, SAG to, let's say, reward Demi Moore and Timothée Chalamet, and then neither of them end up winning at the Oscars. Usually, they're either 4 for 4 or 3 out of 4. They line up very well with the Oscars because the actors are the largest members in terms of percentage of the Academy. And a lot of those actors are also members of SAG who are voting on the SAG Awards. So we know that there's some overlap there. So if the actors like these performances here, well, then there's a high likelihood that they'll just vote for the same people at the Oscars. And when we look at Mikey versus Demi, let's say are the two frontrunners right now, they have the same number of industry awards. Mikey won BAFTA, but Demi won at SAG. The difference then becoming, I think, Demi has the slight edge in terms of she had the Golden Globes moment where she beat out Mikey Madison. She also won at the Critics' Choice Awards. So if you're just comparing apples to apples, Demi should be the frontrunner. And yet I'm still kind of stuck on one interesting statistic when we look at acting races that were really tight going into the Oscars, which is that most of the time they prefer the movie that is more well-liked. So they'll go with Emma Stone in Poor Things over Lily Gladstone in Killers of the Flower Moon because they like Poor Things more than Killers of the Flower Moon. In the same way, they like Everything Everywhere All at Once more than Tar, which is why they went with Michelle Yeoh over Cate Blanchett. But what's interesting is I think the parallels between this year and this kind of a path and the Best Actor category a couple of years ago with Brendan Fraser and Austin Butler, where that year Brendan Fraser was a popcorn actor, similar to how Demi Moore is kind of seen as that, on a kind of comeback, haven't been in a big movie in a few years, kind of has a meta-narrative movie with their own kind of narrative of a comeback acting win. Their movie was a winner of the Best Makeup and Hairstyling Award in the same way The Substance is likely going to win that. And who do they beat out? Fraser beat out Austin Butler, a young, soft-spoken actor from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood whose movie won Best Casting at BAFTA, in the same way Demi Moore may beat out Mikey Madison for Honora, who's a soft-spoken actor who was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, whose movie won Best Casting at BAFTA. The parallels are a little bit strange, and that was kind of the one moment, if we think about the Brendan Fraser year, where I thought Elvis was a more well-liked movie than The Whale, and ultimately it was. It was nominated for Best Picture, and The Whale was not. But at the end of the day, Elvis went home empty-handed, and The Whale ended up getting 2 Oscars. So in a way, that rule kind of keeps true, which is why I'm kind of bumping up against it, because I'm going, well, Honora, I think maybe he's going to win Best Picture. And it's very likely to win, let's say, Best Screenplay, and then has a really good shot at winning for Best Director, and has a good shot for winning for Best Editing. So will there be a scenario where every single time, particularly for the Best Actress category, they go with the actress in the movie they like the most? In that case, should be Honora. But if Honora only wins, let's say, Screenplay and loses to Best Picture for Conclave, well then theoretically, maybe they like The Substance more because they'll give Demi Moore the win and then also the win for Makeup and Hairstyling. What I think makes sense on paper is Mikey Madison actually being the favorite, because in these scenarios, they always go with the actor who is in the more well-liked movie, which I think ultimately is Honora versus The Substance. And yet I can't think of those parallels to something like Brendan Fraser in The Whale to Austin Butler in Elvis. With, of course, the one caveat being Austin Butler in Elvis wasn't the eventual or even possible Best Picture movie in the same way that Honora is. So Really tough to decide where I'm going to lean on this. I think Demi has the narrative, but Mikey's in the more well-liked movie. I may go with stats and how the Oscars traditionally go, and therefore predict a Mikey Madison. But Demi Moore, her win here, I think, is a strong sign of support from an industry group, plus her Golden Globes win, plus her Critics' Choice, plus all those kind of great speeches. I've been lured by the great speeches in the past. I don't want to kind of hold too much weight towards that, but that does matter sometimes in really competitive, tight years. Lots to kind of chew on and think about, but I think at the end of the day, whether you're going to go with Demi Moore or Mikey Madison or even maybe Fernando Torres, go with your gut on this one. This is a really tight race, and if you don't go with your gut, you're ultimately going to regret things at the end of the day. Take it from someone who's been doing this a long time now, on our 9th season of YouTube Oscar predictions. You never go wrong when you kind of go with a movie that you feel is going to win in your gut. And in a tight race like this, sometimes the stats don't matter. Then for Best Actor, SAG went with Timothée Chalamet for A Complete Unknown. And I think some people were surprised by this, although I wasn't. I mean, if you check out many of my other videos, I've been mentioning how I thought Timothée Chalamet was going to win at SAG. So I was kind of prepared for this moment. And because I was prepared for this moment, I had some time even before Chalamet won to think about what would I kind of think if Chalamet ended up winning. And I think ultimately I'm unfazed by this win. Some people, I think, are going to predict Chalamet to win here, and I think that totally makes sense. I mean, 3 out of the last 5 years, the SAG 4 that won at SAG at the 4 main acting categories also overlapped with the Oscars. So just going 4 for 4 for SAG is a pretty accurate strategy most years. But they don't always get it right. You know, last year, most recently, they predicted Lily Gladstone for Best Actress and then went to ultimately Emma Stone for Poor Things. So there is sometimes some differences. And I think this year, the obvious difference will be Timothée Chalamet in A Complete Unknown. I don't think I'm going to predict him ultimately for the Oscars, and that's for a few reasons. The first one is that I've always predicted Timothy to win here because it is a classic kind of a SAG win. I think they like the fact that it's a famous person playing a famous person, that there was a lot of circumstance to playing this kind of a role, that he had to work on it for 5+ years, that he had to become someone else and learn the guitar and sing on the movie and kind of really transform. There's a lot of work that goes into it, which I think the actors really appreciate, the kind of dedication to a man that they also respect another artist, but then kind of bearing yourself into a role. That is a type of a role that I think the actors in particular appreciate. And then also you look at the two different types of movies here. So you had Adrien Brody in The Brutalist versus Timothée Chalamet in A Complete Unknown. One movie, A Complete Unknown, overperformed at SAG, got in for Monica Barbaro, but when this was the first real industry group to reward it for anything, reward her in particular. And then it also got nominated for Best Ensemble. So they really liked the movie. And then you look at Adrien Brody in The Brutalist. They didn't really like The Brutalist. It didn't get nominated for Best Ensemble. It didn't even get a Guy Pearce nomination or a Felicity Jones nomination, despite them ending up getting nominations at the Oscars. So clearly there was an appreciation for A Complete Unknown with this group, more so than The Brutalist. So it shouldn't be a complete shock that Adrien Brody loses out here. So then let's look at the Oscars and let's go, okay, well, the Oscars we know A Complete Unknown is well-liked, but The Brutalist is also well-liked. It got in for Guy Pearce, it got in for Felicity Jones, it's competing in for director, it's probably going to win cinematography, it's probably going to win score, it's going to be a well-liked movie within the Oscars. So then you go, okay, so Chalamet won at an awards group that really liked his movie, and Brody has won at every other awards group that really liked his movie. The only time he lost was when he lost at SAG to an awards group that didn't really like his movie. So if you just make it as simple as that, it makes sense why Brody lost here, but he'll probably win at the Oscars. SAG didn't like The Brutalist, clearly by its nominations, but the Oscars do like The Brutalist. And every time an awards group liked The Brutalist, they rewarded Adrien Brody in its lead. Now, this is definitely a race. I think Chalamet could win at the Oscars. We see 4-4 overlaps with the Oscars a lot. A Complete Unknown is a well-liked movie that may not win in any other category, whereas The Brutalist will likely win in at least a couple other categories. I still end up thinking I'm going to go with Adrien Brody, the older actor. There is a bit of a bias towards younger actors within the Best Actor category. We've seen that time and time again. Austin Butler losing most recently, or Leonardo DiCaprio having to wait his turn. Chalamet kind of feels, I think, in that kind of a mold. And it's important to note that Oscar voting has closed. So even though I thought Chalamet gave a terrific speech, that's not really going to help him in terms of getting Oscar voters on his side because voting's closed. So I think the fact that The Brutalist is well liked at the Oscars, more so than it was well liked here, because Brody won at BAFTA and beat Chalamet there, and beat Chalamet at Critics' Choice, and beat Chalamet at the Golden Globes, more often than not, you would kind of lean, I think, to Adrian Brody. So I think the Best Actress race is pretty competitive. I think the Best Actor race, even though Chalamet wins here, I'm still probably going to go with Adrian Brody. Feel a little bit more confident in that. Didn't want to be too kind of fazed by this win here. Then the Best Supporting Actor and Supporting Actress races went respectively to Kieran Culkin for A Real Pain and Zoe Saldana for Amelia Perez. They've been winning everywhere. I expect them to win at the Oscars as well. Don't overthink things. Pick both of them to win at the Oscars. I think that's definitely going to happen. And just another kind of sign of support, though I do think that people have been willing to separate, I think, Amelia Perez and kind of the controversies that it's been embroiled in with Zoe Saldana and just really liking her performance in that movie. There was some concern that maybe she would falter at the SAG because of the Amelia Perez controversy. Clearly that hasn't happened, and I do think that will inform some of my other predictions in some of the other categories, something that we have to do a little bit more looking into, but something that's going to be really interesting at the Oscars, although I think both these actors are going to win ultimately regardless. So that's about it. Those are my kind of brief thoughts on the acting categories based on the SAG winners. Like I said, a couple days time, Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern time, I'll be giving my full hour-long video talking about my final predictions in all the categories. And then Sunday, the Oscars are happening. And then I'm going to be launching a new series right after the Oscars, which I'm really excited to share with you guys. So stay tuned for that. But I appreciate you guys sticking around. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss Wednesday's video. And until next time, stay tuned.